On December 26, 1943, at 06:15 hours, Captain Shogo Takeuchi stood beside Kawasaki Ki-61 Manufacture No. 263 at Cape Gloucester Airfield on New Britain, staring at an engine that refused to start. The aircraft had been his personal mount for 8 months. 2 white fuselage bands marked it as belonging to the 2nd Chutai commander. An eagle insignia decorated the left side of the cockpit. Red 4-pointed stars marked the wing gun ports. The aircraft had carried him through dozens of combat missions over New Guinea, but this morning, the Kawasaki Ha-40 engine would not fire. Takeuchi was 25 years old, commander of the 2nd Chutai in the 68th Sentai, with 19 confirmed victories. He had flown Ki-61s since April when his unit transitioned from the Nakajima Ki-27. The 68th Sentai had been the first Imperial Japanese Army Air Force unit to receive the new fighter. They deployed to Wewak in New Guinea in June, then moved operations to support airfields across the region as the campaign intensified. Cape Gloucester Airfield sat on the northwestern tip of New Britain, 230 miles west of Rabaul. The field served as a forward operating base for Japanese fighters defending against American bomber raids. But by late December, the tactical situation had collapsed. American forces were preparing to invade Cape Gloucester. Intelligence reported Marine divisions assembling for an amphibious assault. Japanese command ordered all serviceable aircraft withdrawn to Rabaul immediately. Takeuchi's Ki-61 was not serviceable. The Ha-40 engine had been giving trouble for weeks. Oil consumption was high. Cylinder head temperatures ran hot even at idle. The previous day, during a patrol mission, the engine had begun running rough at altitude. Takeuchi landed and reported the problem to the ground crew. The mechanics worked through the night trying to diagnose the issue. They checked spark plugs, adjusted valve clearances, tested magnetos. Everything appeared normal. But when they attempted to start the engine at dawn, it would not fire. The starter motor cranked, the propeller turned over. Compression seemed adequate, but combustion would not initiate. Either the ignition system had failed completely or fuel was not reaching the cylinders. Without proper tools and replacement parts, the mechanics could not repair it in the field. Takeuchi made the decision at 06:40. He would fly a different aircraft back to Rabaul. His personal Ki-61, manufacture No. 263, would be left behind. The ground crew would attempt to camouflage it near the runway in case they could retrieve it later. But everyone knew the truth. The aircraft would almost certainly be captured when the Americans landed. At 0700 hours, Takeuchi took off in another Ki-61 and departed for Rabaul. Behind him, mechanics pushed manufacture No. 263 off the runway into a grove of palm trees at the edge of the airfield. They covered it with cut vegetation. Then they evacuated with the remaining ground personnel. The aircraft sat hidden at Cape Gloucester for 4 days. On December 30th, United States Marines from the 1st Marine Division captured the airfield during the opening phase of Operation Backhander. A patrol discovered the camouflaged Ki-61 that afternoon. The aircraft was intact. The fuselage bands were visible beneath the vegetation. The eagle marking on the cockpit identified it as a command aircraft. Marines from the intelligence section examined it immediately. The Ki-61 was unlike any Japanese fighter the Americans had captured previously. Most captured Japanese aircraft were heavily damaged. This one showed no combat damage. The engine was complete. The instruments were intact. The armament was still installed. 2 12.7mm Ho 103 machine guns in the forward fuselage, 2 7.7mm Type 89 machine guns in the wings. The aircraft was a Type 61-1 Co model, the earliest production variant. It had been built at Kawasaki's Kagamigahara factory in April 1943. Construction number 263. Uncoded serial number 163. The Marines reported the find to the Technical Air Intelligence Unit. TAIU officers arrived at Cape Gloucester on January 2, 1944. They documented every detail of the aircraft. Measurements were taken, photographs captured every angle, the engine was examined, the flight controls were tested, the fuel system was traced, the electrical system was mapped, everything was recorded. This was the first intact Ki-61 the Allies had captured. For 18 months, American pilots had been encountering the aircraft in combat over New Guinea. Intelligence reports called it the Tony. Early sightings suggested it might be a German Messerschmitt Bf 109 or an Italian Mach C-202 operating in Japanese markings. The actual identity remained uncertain until now. Technical examination revealed the truth. The Ki-61 was entirely Japanese in design. The engine was a license-built Kawasaki Ha-40, derived from the German Daimler-Benz DB601. But the airframe was original Kawasaki engineering. The fuselage was semi-triangular in cross-section, narrow and deep. The wings were relatively small for a fighter of this weight, resulting in high wing loading. The landing gear was conventional, with fixed slots in the wing leading edges. The cooling system used wing-mounted radiators, unusual for Japanese fighters which typically employed radial engines. The discovery answered questions that had troubled American intelligence since the Ki-61 first appeared in combat. Pilots reported that the Tony could dive faster than any other Japanese fighter. It could maintain high speeds in level flight. It could absorb more battle damage than the lighter Zero, but it could not turn as tightly as other Japanese types. The airframe explained why. High wing loading meant higher stall speeds and larger turn radii. The liquid-cooled engine was heavier than comparable radial engines, shifting the center of gravity forward. These factors combined to produce an aircraft optimized for speed and firepower rather than maneuverability. The captured Ki-61 was transported to Eagle Farm Airfield near Brisbane, Australia, in March 1944. There, TARU technicians attempted to make the engine operational. The original problem that had grounded the aircraft at Cape Gloucester turned out to be a failed magneto. Once replaced, the Ha-40 engine started normally. The aircraft was test-flown extensively. American test pilots evaluated its performance against captured examples of other Japanese fighters. The Ki-61 proved faster than the Zero in level, flight, and in dives. It had better acceleration. The armament was heavier and more effective. But in sustained turning engagements, the Zero could outturn it easily. American pilots reported that the Ki-61 required careful energy management. It excelled in slashing attacks from altitude. It could extend away from pursuing fighters using its speed advantage. But once drawn into a low-speed turning fight, it became vulnerable. These characteristics matched combat reports from New Guinea. The intelligence value of manufacture number 263 exceeded the technical data it provided. The aircraft represented a snapshot of Japanese fighter capability in late 1943. The condition of the airframe revealed maintenance practices and supply constraints. The engine showed signs of wear that suggested quality control issues in production. The markings indicated unit organization and command structures. Every detail contributed to the larger intelligence picture. In May 1944, the Ki-61 was stripped of its Japanese markings and repainted in American insignia. It received the test serial number XJ003. Further flight testing was conducted to evaluate tactics for American fighters engaging Tonys in combat. The data collected influenced training programs and tactical doctrines across the Pacific Theater. In June 1944, TARU received orders to return to the United States. The captured Ki-61 was disassembled and shipped to Naval Air Station Anacostia near Washington, D.C. There it was reassembled and underwent additional testing. In December 1944, the aircraft was repainted in pseudo-Japanese markings and evaluated against American naval fighters. Test pilots flew it against the F-6F Hellcat, F-4U Corsair, and other types to establish comparative performance data. The tests revealed that American naval fighters held significant advantages in most combat scenarios. The F-6F could outturn the Ki-61 and had superior high-altitude performance. The F-4U was faster at all altitudes and could outclimb the Tony. Both American types had better acceleration and more effective armament. The testing program at Anacostia continued through early 1945. Then, on July 2, 1945, manufacture number 263 crashed at Yanceyville, North Carolina during a test flight. The cause was engine failure. Metal particles were found in the oil system, indicating bearing deterioration. The same problem that had plagued the Ha-40 engine throughout its service life. The aircraft that Captain Shogo Takeuchi had abandoned at Cape Gloucester 18 months earlier was destroyed. The wreckage was written off. But the intelligence gathered from that single aircraft had already served its purpose. The data collected from manufacture number 263 contributed to American understanding of Japanese fighter design and capability during a critical phase of the Pacific War. Captain Takeuchi never learned the fate of his personal aircraft. He flew back to Rabaul on December 26th and continued flying combat missions. On December 21, 1943, 5 days before abandoning his Ki-61 at Cape Gloucester, Takeuchi took off from Borum Airfield near Wewak on an escort mission. His unit was assigned to protect Ki-38 light bombers attacking American positions at Arawe. The mission encountered heavy fighter opposition. American P-38 Lightnings intercepted the formation. In the engagement that followed, Takeuchi's Ki-61 was hit multiple times. The aircraft caught fire. Takeuchi did not bail out. His aircraft crashed into the jungle near Hansa Bay. He was 25 years old, 19 confirmed victories, one of the top Ki-61 pilots in the Imperial Japanese Army Air Force. His body was never recovered. The 68th Sentai continued operations in New Guinea. Through early 1944, they fought a losing battle against overwhelming American air superiority. Engine failures, lack of spare parts, inadequate maintenance facilities, and constant combat attrition steadily reduced their strength. By March 1944, the unit had been effectively destroyed. Survivors were reassigned to other units or relegated to ground combat roles as the Japanese position in New Guinea collapsed completely. Lieutenant Mitsuyoshi Tarui was the other pilot from the 68th Sentai who achieved significant success flying the Ki-61. He and Takeuchi were considered the top 2 Tony pilots in the unit. Both men began their combat careers flying the nimble Ki-27. Both struggled initially with the heavier, less maneuverable Ki-61, but both learned to exploit the Tony's strengths in speed and firepower. Tarui survived longer than Takeuchi. He continued flying Ki-61s after the 68th Sentai was withdrawn from New Guinea. He later flew in the Philippines campaign. His final victory total was recorded as 23 confirmed kills, making him one of the most successful Ki-61 pilots of the war. The combat record of the 68th Sentai illustrated both the potential and the problems of the Ki-61 in operational service. When properly maintained and flown by experienced pilots who understood its characteristics, the Tony was a formidable opponent. It could engage American fighters on relatively equal terms, but the aircraft required constant maintenance. The Ha-40 engine was temperamental and prone to failure. Spare parts were scarce. Properly trained mechanics were in short supply. These logistical constraints limited the Ki-61's effectiveness more than any tactical deficiency. By late 1943, when manufacture number 263 was abandoned at Cape Gloucester, the tide of the Pacific War had turned decisively against Japan. American industrial production was overwhelming Japanese capacity to replace losses. Better aircraft were entering service on the American side. Japanese pilots were being killed faster than new pilots could be trained. The Ki-61, once considered a modern and capable fighter, was already being overtaken by events. But the aircraft still had one more role to play. As American B-29 Superfortress bombers began attacking the Japanese home islands in late 1944, the Ki-61 proved to be one of the few Japanese fighters capable of intercepting them at high altitude. The 244th Sentai was formed specifically for the defense of Tokyo. Established in April 1942 and stationed at Chofu Air Base just west of the capital. The unit's mission was to intercept enemy bombers threatening the city. Initially equipped with obsolescent Ki-27 fighters, the unit received Ki-61s in early 1944. By October, the 244th Sentai had approximately 40 Ki-61s and had spent months training specifically to counter B-29 raids. The B-29 was unlike anything Japanese fighters had encountered. It flew at altitudes above 30,000 feet. It was heavily armed with remote-controlled gun turrets. It could absorb tremendous battle damage and continue flying. Conventional fighter attacks often proved ineffective. The Ki-61 was one of the few Japanese fighters that could reach B-29 operating altitude with sufficient performance margin to conduct attacks. But even at extreme altitude, downing a B-29 required exceptional skill and often suicidal courage. On November 7, 1944, the commanding officer of the 10th Air Division issued a directive that changed the nature of air combat over Japan. He authorized the formation of specialized ramming attack units. Pilots would deliberately collide their fighters with B-29s to destroy both aircraft. The attacks were not strictly kamikaze missions. Pilots were expected to collide with the bomber's tail or wingtip, shearing off control surfaces, then bail out before their own aircraft disintegrated. Many pilots survived these attacks. Some conducted multiple ramming attacks during their combat careers. But the casualty rate was extremely high. The 244th Sentai formed a special ramming attack flight called the Hagakure Tai. The unit was composed of volunteers from the Sentai's 3 squadrons. First Lieutenant Toru Shinomiya was selected to lead the ramming flight. Shinomiya was 24 years old, an experienced pilot with multiple combat missions. He understood the mission would likely be fatal, but accepted the assignment without hesitation. On December 3, 1944, a formation of B-29s approached Tokyo. The 244th Sentai scrambled every available fighter. Shinomiya led the Hagakure Tai toward the Peace bomber stream at maximum climb rate. The Ki-61s had been stripped of fuselage armament and armor plate to reduce weight and improve high-altitude performance. They carried minimal fuel and no ammunition beyond the wing guns. Everything was sacrificed for altitude capability. At 32,000 feet, Shinomiya positioned his Ki-61 above and behind a B-29 designated long distance from the 498th Bombardment Group. He dove toward the bomber, aiming for the vertical stabilizer. At the last moment, he rolled slightly to impact the tail with his left wing. The collision tore the vertical stabilizer completely off the B-29. The bomber immediately entered an uncontrollable spin. Shinomiya's Ki-61 lost most of its left outer wing panel. The aircraft rolled violently. Shinomiya fought to maintain control long enough to slow the aircraft and reduce altitude. At 12,000 feet, he managed to bring the crippled fighter to a near-level attitude. He jettisoned the canopy and bailed out. His parachute opened successfully. He landed in a rice paddy near Chofu Air Base. Rescue crews retrieved him within an hour. He suffered minor injuries from the bailout, but was otherwise unharmed. 2 other pilots from the Hagakure Tai also conducted ramming attacks that day. Sergeant Masao Itagaki collided with a different B-29, but his aircraft was too badly damaged to land. He bailed out successfully. Sergeant Matsumi Nakano rammed a 3rd bomber and managed to crash-land his stripped Ki-61 in a field. All 3 pilots survived. The ramming attacks of December 3, 1944, were celebrated throughout Japan. The damaged Ki-61s were displayed publicly in Tokyo. Shinomiya's aircraft, missing most of its left wing, was exhibited inside the Matsuya department store. Nakano's crashed fighter was displayed outside. A life-size cutaway drawing of a B-29 fuselage was placed beside them to illustrate the target the pilots had attacked. The 3 pilots became the first recipients of the Bukosho, an award established on December 7, 1944, by Emperor Hirohito to recognize exceptional valor in combat. The award was roughly equivalent to the American Medal of Honor or the British Victoria Cross. Of the 89 known recipients of the Bukosho during World War II, most were pilots who fought against B-29s. The success of the December 3rd ramming attacks encouraged the 244th Sentai to continue the tactic. Throughout December 1944 and into early 1945, the unit conducted dozens of ramming attacks against B-29 formations. The Sentai claimed 73 B-29s destroyed by all methods and 92 damaged. These claims were certainly inflated, as were most air combat claims by all sides during World War II. But even accounting for overclaiming, the 244th Sentai inflicted significant losses on American bomber formations. The unit was commanded by Captain Teruhiko Kobayashi, starting in November 1944. Kobayashi was 24 years old when he assumed command, making him the youngest Sentai commander in the Imperial Japanese Army Air Force. He had previously served as a bomber pilot, participating in the Battle of Hong Kong in December 1941. He transitioned to fighters in November 1943 and completed training at the Akano Army Air Service School. Despite his relative inexperience in fighters, Kobayashi proved to be an exceptional leader. He flew combat missions alongside his pilots rather than directing from the ground. He led by example. His personal courage and aggressive tactics inspired intense loyalty among the men under his command. Kobayashi himself conducted at least one ramming attack. On January 27, 1945, he deliberately collided with a B-29 at a high altitude while flying Ki-61 manufacture, number 3295. The impact destroyed the bomber's vertical stabilizer. Kobayashi's Ki-61 lost significant portions of both wings. He bailed out successfully and parachuted safely to the ground. He flew combat the next day in a different aircraft. His final victory total was recorded as 3 B-29s and 2 F-6F Hellcats destroyed. Other pilots in the 244th Sentai achieved higher scores. Captain Nagao Shirai was credited with 11 B-29s and 2 F-6Fs destroyed, 6 other aircraft damaged. He was considered the leading B-29 killer in the Imperial Japanese Army Air Force. Captain Chuichi Ichikawa was credited with 9 B-29s and 1 F-6F destroyed, 6 B-29s damaged. First Lieutenant Toru Shinomiya, the ramming attack leader, survived multiple combat missions and continued flying until he was killed in action during the battle for Okinawa. He died as a Tokotai pilot, conducting a conventional kamikaze attack against American naval forces. The 244th Sentai continued operating Ki-61s through the spring of 1945. In April, the unit began receiving Ki-100 fighters, an improved version of the Tony that replaced the troublesome Ha-40 engine with a reliable Mitsubishi Ha-112 radial engine. The Ki-100 proved to be an excellent fighter, significantly better than the Ki-61 in most respects. On July 25, 1945, Major Kobayashi and his pilots took off in their Ki-100s to engage F-6F Hellcats that were attacking Yokkaichi airfield. The unit had been ordered to stand down and wait for incoming bombers. Kobayashi ignored the order and engaged the American fighters at extremely low altitude. The engagement became a swirling dogfight at hangar-top height. The 244th Sentai claimed 10 Hellcats destroyed. Actual American losses were 2 aircraft. The Japanese lost 2 fighters. Japanese newspapers celebrated the action. But Kobayashi faced court-martial for disobeying orders. The charges were serious and could result in severe punishment. However, when Emperor Hirohito learned of Kobayashi's actions, he expressed approval. The court-martial was dropped immediately. Major Kobayashi survived the war. He worked in civilian industries until 1954, when he joined the newly formed Japan Air Self-Defense Force. He became a fighter pilot again, flying F-86 Sabres. He studied in the United States for 6 months in 1955 and 1956, receiving training on jet aircraft operations. He continued serving until his death in 1957 at age 36. The combat record of the 244th Sentai demonstrated what Japanese pilots could accomplish even in the final desperate months of the war. The unit operated under impossible conditions. Fuel was scarce. Spare parts were nearly non-existent. Replacement aircraft arrived slowly, if at all. Trained pilots were increasingly rare. Yet the unit continued fighting effectively until the end. The ramming attacks conducted by the Hagakure-tai represented both the courage and the desperation of Japan's air defense effort. These were not senseless suicide attacks. They were calculated tactical decisions made by skilled pilots who understood their aircraft's capabilities and limitations. The Ki-61, stripped of excess weight, could just barely reach B-29 altitude. Once there, conventional attacks often failed because the fighters lacked the performance margin to position effectively. Ramming attacks succeeded where guns failed. But the cost was horrific. Pilots who survived one ramming attack were expected to conduct more until they were killed or too badly injured to fly. They were treated as dead men even before their first mission. The burden was crushing. Many pilots accepted their fate with stoic resignation. Some found meaning in the sacrifice. Others simply did their duty, because no alternative existed. The use of ramming attacks illustrated how thoroughly Japan's strategic position had deteriorated by late 1944. No nation resorts to such tactics unless all better options have been exhausted. The appearance of the B-29 over Japan in November 1944 marked the beginning of the end. The Japanese home islands were now within range of American heavy bombers operating from the Mariana Islands. The bombing campaign would intensify throughout 1945. Japanese air defenses would be gradually overwhelmed. Cities would burn. The civilian population would suffer catastrophically. And Japanese fighter pilots, flying aircraft like the Ki-61 that were already obsolescent, would continue fighting a battle they could not win. The Kawasaki Ki-61 Hien was never the best fighter of World War II. It was not as maneuverable as the Zero. It was not as fast as late-war American fighters. It was not as well-armed as German fighters. It was plagued throughout its service life by engine problems that limited its effectiveness. But the Ki-61 represented Japan's attempt to build a modern fighter that could compete on equal terms with Allied aircraft. The design incorporated self-sealing fuel tanks, a feature absent from earlier Japanese fighters. It included pilot armor. It mounted heavy armament by Japanese standards. It was fast and could sustain damage that would destroy lighter aircraft. In the hands of skilled pilots like Captain Shogo Takeuchi, Lieutenant Mitsuyoshi Tarui, and Major Teruhiko Kobayashi, the Ki-61 proved it could be deadly. These men learned to exploit the aircraft's strengths while minimizing its weaknesses. They achieved victory totals that demonstrated the Tony's potential when properly employed. But individual skill could not overcome systemic problems. Japan's industrial base could not produce enough Ki-61s to meet demand. The Kawasaki Ha-40 engine suffered chronic reliability issues that were never fully resolved. Logistics and supply chains broke down under Allied attacks. Pilot training programs could not replace losses. By mid-1945, Japanese air power was effectively destroyed. The story of the Ki-61 is the story of Japan's air war in microcosm. Initial success gave way to attrition and eventual defeat. Technological capability was undermined by industrial limitations. Pilot skill was diluted by unsustainable losses. Tactical innovation could not compensate for strategic overreach. The aircraft that Captain Takeuchi abandoned at Cape Gloucester in December 1943, manufacture number 263, became a symbol of that larger story. Captured intact by American forces, it provided intelligence that helped the Allies understand and counter Japanese fighter capabilities. Tested extensively, it revealed strengths and weaknesses that influenced American tactics and training. Ultimately destroyed in a crash caused by the same engine problems that had plagued it throughout its service life, it ended as it had begun, a victim of technical issues that Japanese industry could never fully solve. Today, only a handful of Ki-61s survive. Several are displayed in museums in Japan and the United States. None are airworthy. The aircraft exists now primarily in photographs, technical documents, and the memories of the men who flew and maintained them. The pilots who achieved renown flying the Tony are nearly all gone. Takeuchi died in combat in 1943. Tarui survived the war but passed away decades later. Kobayashi lived until 1957. The mechanics and ground crews who kept the troublesome Ha-40 engines running have faded into history. But the record of what they accomplished remains. Captain Takeuchi's 19 victories, Lieutenant Tarui's 23 confirmed kills, Major Kobayashi's 3 B-29s destroyed, and his leadership of the most famous home defense unit in Japan, the 244th Sentai's 73 B-29 claims, and 9 Bukosho recipients. These numbers tell a story of skill, courage, and sacrifice in the face of overwhelming odds. The Kawasaki Ki-61 was Japan's answer to a question the nation could not ultimately answer. How do you defeat an enemy with vastly superior industrial capacity, technological advancement, and strategic resources? The Ki-61 was well designed. It was competently built. It was flown by brave and skilled pilots. But it was not enough. Nothing Japan could build would have been enough. The Pacific War was decided by factors far beyond the capabilities of any individual aircraft. Yet the men who flew the Ki-61 deserve to be remembered. They fought for a cause that history judged harshly. They served a regime that committed terrible atrocities. But they were also human beings who showed remarkable courage in combat. They faced death repeatedly and did not flinch. They continued fighting when the war was clearly lost. They demonstrated the best qualities of the warrior tradition, even while serving a fundamentally unjust cause. Their story is complicated. It resists simple narratives of heroism or villainy. It requires acknowledging both the skill they displayed and the context in which that skill was employed. But it deserves to be told. The Ki-61 deserves to be remembered. Not as the best fighter of the war, but as a capable aircraft that served with distinction in impossible circumstances. Not as a war-winning weapon, but as a machine that, in the right hands, could be formidable. Not as a symbol of Japanese air superiority, but as evidence of what Japanese engineers and pilots could accomplish even as their nation's strategic position collapsed. If you found this story as compelling as we did, please take a moment to like this video. It helps us share more forgotten stories from the Second World War. Subscribe to stay connected with these untold histories. Each one matters, each one deserves to be remembered, and we'd love to hear from you. Leave a comment below telling us where you're watching from. Our community spans the globe. From veterans to history enthusiasts, you're part of something special here. Thank you for watching, and thank you for keeping these stories alive.